Rory, what do you think of my new sexy outfit? I think you made some comments about it recently. My new clothing range I have on.
I can't even remember what I said about it. Bit lesbian. I'd say the least.
I don't know, man. I think it's quite like new tech. I look like I work for Apple.
At the Genius Bar.
Yeah. You know what I actually think I look like? Do you know in GTA 5 when Michael gets a mission to go blow up the office?
Yes.
You know, of the big tech
Yes,
company. Do you remember what it's called?
I
don't remember what it's called.
forget the tech company.
But he has to like go and blow it up or something, and then but beforehand he has to go to like a millennial clothes shop
Yeah.
and buy
I remember
millennial
that.
clothes.
Yeah.
So I think that's exactly.
He gets like a one-strapped backpack.
I think I look like that. I've no business in these clothes.
Or like an H&M mannequin.
When I'm really hungover, I get the strangest cravings. I feel like if I'm really hungover, I'd be good going to like a funeral or something. You know, you get like that spread afterwards.
Well, like the little triangle sandwiches.
Vol-au-vents. You only ever get a vol-au-vent at a funeral, and they're the best.
And you
thing.
hate mushroom, but you love a mushroom vol-au-vent.
Well, it's like cream of mushroom.
Yeah, it's like,
that
like soupy sauce.
Cream of man.
Cream of man, yeah. I would love a funeral spread on a hangover. Like, I wanted to ask you: are there any films that have scarred you for life, or like something that really terrified you, maybe when you were younger and like stuck with you,
or a disturbing scene that's really got
just
me
a film or whatever, you know?
That scene in Apocalypse Now where they butcher that cow. I think about that all the time.
That's horrific.
Rough.
Yeah, it is so brutal. Horrific.
I went through a period of thinking The Shining was like, I was a little bit spooked by it the first time I saw it and was like, that was an incredible film. And then I found it funny for a while. Every time I'd watched it, and I was like, it's getting funnier and funnier. And then it started to get scarier.
I'm the exact
again.
same.
And, you know, the last maybe couple of times I've been really creeped out by it.
Yeah, the first time I watched it, it didn't scare me at all. I just thought it was great.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, it went to being hilarious and then to being like really terrifying.
Yeah, it's a real creeper.
I think that day Room 237 documentary did an awful lot for me of The Shining. It's watch it in a completely different way now.
It goes so crackpot in a great way.
Something's went on with that film.
One that really fucked me up was Signs.
Signs?
Yeah, Night Shyamalan. Because that came out, 2002? So we would have been like 9 or 8 or whatever. Mm-hmm. I remember my dad rented it. And I've never been so frightened about it in my life. I remember I went to go to bed and they had to be like, yeah, I was like, I'm fine. Yeah, okay. Like, I didn't sleep for months. It fucking terrified me.
The first film that really scared me like that, I remember like being really scared of, was that Nightmare on Elm Street. The first time I watched it, I was very young, and I remember not being able to sleep.
It's
and I remember the idea
but
then you're young, like, it got you the idea of Freddy coming into your dreams, and then it made you not want to sleep.
Science just has some of those moments. It's the recording on the news. It's like a handheld video camera in like Mexico at some kid's party. As a part where they're like, it's outside, and you see the alien walk past. And I was like, Jesus Christ.
That bit,
the music and all that. That's a great film. It's wildly underrated. It's a masterclass in suspense.
What is it? It's one of the scary movies. There's a bit.
Scary Movie 3.
Scary Movie 3.
There's a lot of signs in it.
The bit that made me laugh and still makes me laugh when I think about it. It's the only bit I remember from the film is whenever they like come out of the basement and he picks up his shovel and loads it like a shotgun. The shell comes out.
Yeah, I remember the part where Leslie Nielsen, he's the president in the Scary Movie films. He was Naked Gun, and they meet the aliens and they're talking to them and they like feeling like what they do is like they pay with their fingers, and Leslie was like, "So we're not so different after all." Someone looks at me, has to hide
it. But yeah, whenever you ask me about a film that had scarred me for life, I can't. The Shining was kind of like on the fly. I wouldn't really count that, but I basically have 3 different answers that go in 3 wildly different directions. So one that scarred me, as in like scared me, probably the first horror movie that I saw was Jeepers Creepers. I don't think it's a brilliant movie or anything, but it scared me at the time when I was a kid. But then to answer the question in a different way, one thing that scarred me, and I've still never seen the rest of the film, is it's one of the Bond films. I don't know what it's called.
Right. I will know if you tell me anything
my
about
parents must have taped it on TV when back in the day when you had tapes.
Oh, wow.
And they taped over it about 10 minutes in. So you get like the opening sequence. It's Sean Connery. He has a fight underwater in like scuba gear.
Thunderball.
Sounds a lot like Thunderball.
So
There's a lot of that.
I've seen the first 10 minutes of Thunderball about 10 times, but I've never seen the rest of the film.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever will. And then the only other one that, like, you know, you could say like changed my life was Midsummer.
I didn't see that. It came out a few years ago.
It's really good. There's a director's cut of it that's very good as well. But it took me so long to figure out what it was, like the feeling I felt.
Yeah.
Because I was saying I'd been radicalized by it or something, because I didn't have a better word.
Yeah.
But the word to describe it is awe. I was in awe after it, and I didn't know what name to give that feeling.
Yeah, it was really disorientating, like the visual style of it. I remember like the camera would like fucking do complete 360s and things like that to really disorientate you.
Well, it's like designed to simulate a trip on magic mushrooms, basically.
You know what really melts me? When you're watching a film and people say, they bought in like, do you know this is a true story? As if that automatically improves the quality of the film. That really melts me.
Especially if they've taken wild liberties with the actual story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And speaking of which, Colonels and Cornheads, welcome back to the Popcorn Head podcast with your host, Popcorn Head. I am joined, as usual, by my co-producers, Sir Rory of House Moore and Sir Tom of House Brady. Now, today we're looking at Bong Joon Ho's crime thriller, Memories of Murder. It stars Song Kang-ho and Kim Sang-kyung. I'll get there. And the film is based on what is basically considered South Korea's first confirmed case of serial murder, which occurred between 1986 and 91. And it was in the rural area of Hwaseong, which is in the northwest of South Korea, sort of just south of Seoul. Now, with this film being based on actual events, there will, of course, be some major spoilers when we're talking about the historical context of the film. So if you haven't seen the film, please, for the love of God, go and watch it before listening. You have been warned.
피해자는 12일, 16일. 나이트가 아니고 나이스! Good idea! 뭐 내가 사찰을 만들래?
So here we go. Big spoiler alert. The murders remained unsolved for 30 years. And when the film was released in 2003, the killer hadn't been apprehended. So before we delve into the actual film, we'll look back at the historical context and the real life case. So over a period of 5 years, 15 women and young girls were murdered in the Hwaseong area. All the victims' bodies had been found bound, gagged, raped, strangled to death, in most cases with articles of their own clothing. It was the largest ever criminal case in South Korea. There was over something like 20,000 suspects investigated over a 30-year period, and there was major public attention toward the killings due to how brutal they were, obviously, and that lingering fear knowing that the culprit was still at large. It's also worth noting that at this time, DNA analysis it had just been introduced in Western countries, whereas Korea, they were incapable of even conducting basic blood type testing at the time. So during the investigation, at least 4 people who were deemed suspects in the case committed suicide in the 90s, having been investigated and allegedly subjected to police brutality and abuse.
Torture.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. But then the release of the movie, Memories of Murder, it reignited interest in the case, and because the statute of limitations was fast approaching for the most recent victims, the case was making headlines once again. So when the killings took place, the statute of limitations for first-degree murder was 15 years, but this would be increased to 25 years in 2007 before being completely abolished in 2015. However, it would not be retroactive, so the clock was obviously ticking in this case. In 2019, Lee Chun-jae was identified as a suspect after his DNA matched from the underwear of one of the victims, and then subsequent testing would basically show DNA matches to 4 other victims. Now, when Lee became a suspect, he was already in prison, having raped and murdered his sister-in-law.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and Lee, he would end up confessing to 14 murders, 4 of which had not been included in the original list of crimes. He would also confess to like over, I think it was 30 rapes and attempted rapes. So police, in trying to determine a motive, they revealed that Lee, he had very poor self-esteem, being a deeply introverted personality, and following this mandatory, he had to do mandatory military service, obviously, still at this point.
I think you still do, don't you?
Yeah. It still happened back then. Following that, he began committing these sex crimes. So it was like in his deranged mind, it was a way of expressing his frustration at the monotony of life following the military service, you know? And he displayed obviously psychopathic tendencies and was incapable of basically empathizing with his victims. You know, he would show off his crimes like displays rather than try and, you know, cover it up. So in 2020, Lee he confessed in court, which would lead to the acquittal of this guy called Yoon Sung-yo, who at 22 years old was falsely accused of what was determined to be a copycat crime, modeled after the real killer, but obviously it turned out it was Lee. It sounds kind of familiar, you know, like the Guildford 4 scenario, you know, people being coerced into confessing by the police under immense pressure for like that quick conviction, resolution, forging documents and the like, you know.
I've never understood the mindset that leads you to do that. Like, why would you want to, you know, finger someone per choice of words? Why would you want to like frame someone?
Yeah.
And then allow the killer to continue?
Yeah.
You know, or are they just so incompetent?
I think with the Guildford 4 thing, it was like immense pressure from public government level. It was, you know, obviously it wasn't a good thing to
guess
do. It
it's
was a terrible
probably
thing
the
to
same
do. But
thing.
yeah, it was just like, let's just get this, it's get someone locked up.
Probably the same thing in Korea as well.
Absolutely. Show of strength, show
that we can actually do our jobs when we need to.
Yeah.
But anyway, Lee, he would remain in prison, obviously, because he was already serving a life sentence. And despite his confession, the statute of limitations prevented him from being prosecuted for the serial murders. So pretty handy that he was already put away, I guess. Yeah. But like, maybe that's the only reason he did confess, you know, boredom of the monotonous prison life, much like with the military, you know?
Yeah, you're not going to be getting out after that. I should fucking hope anyway.
So on to the film, Memories of Murder. It follows Park Do-man, who's a local detective claiming to have the eyes of a shaman, and he becomes embroiled in investigating these serial murders. He's completely out of his depth. You know, he's used to dealing with petty crime in a small rural town, you know, forging evidence, baiting confessions out of people until he finds himself up against a meticulous killer.
Can we just talk about his shaman's eyes for a second?
Yes,
because that really made me laugh. Whenever he's telling the other detectives about this, and he's like, I have a shaman's eyes, they never lie.
Yep.
And then the guy's like, okay, look at those two guys over there. One of them is a rapist, the other is the victim's brother. And he like walked in and caught the guy doing it and then dragged him down here. Which one's the rapist? And he's like,
He's just sort of looking like,
Yeah, like... and then it just cuts.
And you never get to find out.
Yeah. It's interesting because the guy who's dressed more like casually, in the eyes of the law, might potentially be the rapist. The guy in like the tracksuit. I feel like this is kind of a theme throughout the movie.
Okay.
It might not be who you expect it to be.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, so Park Do-man, he ends up getting partnered with this guy, Seo Tae-yoon, who's a cop sent from Seoul to help with the investigation. He's like a big city cop. Yeah. And immediately the two men clash in their methods. You know, Seo, he plays things by the book. He's reliant on documentation as evidence. And
he's also just much smarter.
He's an actual detective. And yet that undercurrent of frustration, it builds and builds throughout the film, sinking both men into obsessive desperation in the face of horrific violence. The film, it completely subverts the conventions of a detective story in a lot of ways. You know, it becomes an examination of that agony that comes from desperation and defeat, and how institutional incompetence made it a lot easier for the killer to commit these crimes in like a fascist regime. It's probably worth touching on South Korea's history because it's such an important factor in the narrative.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much you could talk about. Gavin asked me to like look into the history of it, and I was like looking forward to doing this podcast because I was like, oh, this is great. I'll not have to do any homework for this. And I've ended up writing like 4 pages on the Korean War. But
that's going to end it.
So after World War II, and probably better to start after the Unification War in China, where Mao beats back Chiang Kai-shek to Taiwan. Not going to cause any problems in the future, I'm sure. And then the leader of North Korea is, at this point, Kim Il-sung, right?
Oh.
It's Kim Il-sung, then Kim Jong-il, then Kim Jong-un, which is who we've got now. Well, it's their surname comes first in Korea. But Kim Il-sung is like genuinely popular to the point where whenever the US goes to war with Korea in US propaganda, they have to claim that it's not actually him, it's an imposter. And they have this full story about this, how this guy is like pretending to be Kim Il-sung. He had got prestige fighting in Manchuria. There was a lot of North Korean soldiers who went on to fight in the war who had a lot of combat experience already.
Okay.
Winning in Manchuria. So the Korean War is, in popular culture, it's sort of seen as the forgotten war.
Yeah,
especially in America. Like, it's been memory hold, basically.
Yeah.
And
very few films.
Yeah.
By the Korean War as opposed to like the Vietnam War, Second World War.
Yeah.
It sort of is forgotten.
And it is
covered
weird.
Up nearly.
America after World War II had a lot of prestige. They had this image, and they were thought of as kind of like an anti-colonial power, promoting democracy and like the rights of man and stuff around the world, like self-determination and stuff. Yeah, but like from the jump after World War II, that was bullshit.
Yeah,
like it was never true. They inherit these colonies from Britain and France and in this case Japan. They inherit South Korea from Japan.
And it was a Japanese puppet state.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So the Americans take over, and the government that's running South Korea at the time of the Korean War is an American puppet government. And it's actually the same people. It's the same like ruling class that was in place under the Japanese.
Right, okay.
So they were wildly unpopular, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And then does Kim Il-sung come in after the sort of American...
No, so what happens is there's an island called Jeju Island in South Korea, right?
Yeah.
There's an uprising around the island, and this puppet state goes in to put down this uprising and kills like 100,000 people. It's not a huge country. That's a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think they kill 60,000 on Jeju Island and then 40,000 on like the territory surrounding it. And this is after they had been doing a lot of saber rattling towards the north. And, their leaders were like, we could take the north tomorrow. We can take it. And it's such a it sounds from what I've read and what I've heard, it's kind of like a hold me back, bro kind of thing. Like we want to do it, but the Americans keep telling us to hold off.
Do.
Yeah. It's like, so then whenever they're putting down this uprising, and also I should mention that at this point, the north of Korea is way more developed, more urbanized, more industrialized. So, like, North Korea at this point is wealthier. The South is kind of like what we would... It's not obviously exactly the same, but it's kind of similar to how North and South Korea are now. Like, the situation is inverted.
Yeah.
But at this stage, the North is having to send food aid to the South at times. So they see what they see as, like, imperial stooges massacring their countrymen. And they're like, we need to put a stop to this. So they invade, and obviously the Americans don't take too kindly to this.
Oh, yeah.
They destroy basically every building in the north of Korea. They basically Gaza the whole country to the point where the people to survive are like driven underground and live like Morlocks for years. Any wonder it leads to this crazy cultish military dictatorship that they have today.
Yeah, so South Korea is a shit show at this stage.
Yeah. But like nowadays, North Korea is this like crazy hermit kingdom or whatever we call it.
They've done the reverse.
But you can, the roles have reversed. And this is the process of how that happens. So you can kind of understand why North Korea are so keen on having a nuclear deterrent, You can understand why they keep trying to make a nuke because of the generational trauma of what happened. We should also mention that when the Americans arrive with their fleet, they park it in between China and Taiwan. because Mao is about to invade Taiwan and reunify China. Yeah. So the Americans are like, no, you don't. Stick their fleet in there. So it's like, we'll solve one problem while we're dealing with another problem.
Yeah. Geographically, it doesn't really make sense, does it? Because they're going like around it.
Yeah.
Nearly. But yeah, obviously there's an underhand reason. Exactly. Because it makes no sense to do it that way.
Yeah. So then MacArthur executes this pincer maneuver where he lands troops behind the North Korean lines and eventually drives them all the way back up the peninsula. So as the war goes on, MacArthur gets crazier and crazier, and it's like a fucking miracle that there wasn't a nuclear war. He's asking if they can use tactical nukes to...
He's Supreme Allied Commander at this point as well. He's in charge of all of the West's military at once.
So he wants to drop a line of nuclear bombs along the border with China so that no Chinaman can cross into Korea for 60 years or something. But the long and short of it is that the North basically drives the Americans out, and the war is kind of frozen in amber along the 38th parallel, which is where the country had been partitioned before the war started. All of this is not to say oh yay, communism, wow, everything would have been so much better if they had won the Cold War or whatever the fuck. Mao was still a crazy dictator. My favorite crazy Mao story is, it's not it is and it isn't funny. It's funny because he's being really stupid, but the implications are horrific. So Mao thinks that the sparrows are pests and are eating all the farmers' crops or whatever. So he has them all killed.
All the sparrows?
All the sparrows. Mao orders all the sparrows to be killed, but didn't realize that they're part of an ecosystem and they were eating the actual pests.
Yeah.
And then the bugs eat all the crops, and there's
where the famine came from?
Huge famine. Yeah.
Is that how it happened?
Yes, that's how it happened, because Mao was being fucking stupid.
That's mental.
Yes, exactly. So, it's not to say Mao was the good guy. And
Chairmark Mao.
Yeah, the North Koreans were the good guys and everything. It's just, we're just talking about matters of historical fact, and the kind of fairy story or the disappeared story of what happened is very, very interesting.
His chin and his lip. He's got this mad boil on his chin
and
his lip. Really?
Yeah, well, bad boys that tend to have boils. Like Cromwell, he was an ugly bugger.
So yeah, after the war, South Korea was economically supported by the Americans, to the point where at one point their entire national budget was American aid. 100% of their budget was American aid.
The sort of role reversal you've talked about between Korea, the role reversal between the cop from Seoul and your main chubby-faced cop.
Yeah, it could be a reflection of that.
How from the start he's so crooked, but towards the end, it's
a complete role reversal of the character.
Exactly.
We do get into that, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a role reversal of Korea.
We have a lot to get through.
Yeah.
We must move on.
Yeah, I'm going to close that document once and for all.
We're all good, yeah?
Yeah.
So anyway, back to the film. Following his debut film, Bong Joon Ho, he made a film called Barking Dogs Never Bite, which it had been critically appraised, but it was a financial disaster. So Bong wanted to make a crime film that showed a conflict of extreme emotions. Now, Bong, he was really interested in the traditions. He was really...
He's going to drop in Trump going bing, bing, bong, bing.
Bing, bing, bong, bong, bing, bing, bing. You know what that is, right?
He was basically really interested in the traditions of crime films in Korean cinema, which would deviate from traditional Hollywood thrillers, which focus more on plot, whereas Korean thrillers, they would focus more on humanity and emotions, basically how people would behave against the backdrop of crime, rather than focusing on the crime itself. So in 1996, Bong, he went to see this play called Come to See Me by King Gwang Rim. Try saying that after £5. And this play, it was basically based
Sounds like a sex act.
Yeah, it does.
The Rim.
The play was based on the investigation into these killings, with the narrative being structured through the questioning of three different suspects. So that was your 3-act narrative, which obviously always gets reflected in the film as well. Now, Bong, he found the play incredibly moving and it inspired him to pursue this project. Basically, he undertook 6 months of intensive research into the serial killings before actually moving on to write the screenplay. At one point, like, he even considered doing his own investigation with all the research he had actually conducted, because like he gained access to this wealth of internal information that some hadn't even made public before. So he interviewed detectives, journalists who had all been involved with the case, as well as some of the locals in the area. But obviously, the person he wanted to meet the most was the perpetrator. He had become obsessed with finding out his ambitions and personal problems, which would lead him to commit such fucking heinous crimes. All he could think about was what would he have actually been like. So making Memories of Murder, it was undoubtedly a huge challenge for Bong, considering you're telling a story with no definitive conclusion here. He also felt these unresolved crimes, they were a great weight on the country, something left undone in Korean society.
Shame.
Yeah, but it's an incredible...
That whole time, sorry, I couldn't really pay attention to what you were saying because I was thinking about Bong Joon Ho, his cameo in the movie being as the guy who's wearing the women's panty, jacking off.
I never realised that was him. That's good.
No, it's not. I'm just saying. That would be funny if it was.
That's even better.
But it's an incredibly sophisticated form of storytelling. There's a definitive question mark lingering over the whole film that can't be eliminated. There is no resolution. So it requires great writing, characterization, and visual storytelling to really pull this off. Now, Bong, he was actually influenced by this graphic novel called From Hell, written by Alan Moore, who was also known, he basically did the graphic novels of like Watchmen, V for Vendetta, Batman the Killing Joke, big comics, big graphic novels. But yet, From Hell, it was based on the Whitechapel murders and the identity and the motives of Jack the Ripper.
Saucy Jack.
Yeah, Saucy Jack. Yeah, like detailing the crimes, but at the same time, the social issues of Victorian England at that time. And
that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I would like to read that, actually.
Like to read that.
There is a film of it with Johnny Depp, Ian Holm, and Heather Graham.
Wow.
The film was alright. I would like to read the graphic novel. But anyway, the whole concept, it was based around Jack the Ripper, but it was more about looking at social issues of Victorian England. Bong took this concept, it inspired him to take aim at South Korea's military police rule at that time in the 80s. Let's cast a light on the corruption, limitations, lack of resources, and all-round ineptitude that prevented the killer from being caught. It's an ineptitude that really trickles down, and it has a serious impact on the investigation in the film as it progresses. Now, while he was storyboarding, Bong came to realize that the film, it was like a road movie for faces. So like a road movie in that, a main character leaves home on a trip, which alters their perspective from their day-to-day life, which really initiates when lead detective Park Do-man claims he can read a suspect just by examining their face, which we mentioned already. And like the actors' faces and how they were shot in the film had become a really key element. One of the suspects was cast for like his innocent face and doe eyes, which would make the notion that he could be the killer even more frightening. But how Bong stages and shoots the characters, it's vitally important. A character's position in the frame will really reflect their position in the narrative. So in the first act, Park, the local detective, he's frequently shot in close up. He's always sort of center frame. Quite more often than not, he's sort of looking basically at the camera. And it's because the investigation is dominated through his methods, intimidation, torturing suspects. So that's why he dominates the camera. There's a prime example of the scene with the first suspect, Kwang Ho, like the boy.
The poor special needs boy that they torture into giving a confession.
Yeah, like they take him. The lead to like get to him, it comes from like, he's sitting there talking to his girlfriend, and she's talking about something she heard from a senile old woman about Kwang Ho following her. So that's his lead to get onto him. Yeah. And then it leads to a scene that, they interrogate him, but then they take him out into the woods. And there's this long take. They've got Kwang Ho in the woods and they're coercing him into a confession, pretending they're going to bury him. Like one of them's like digging his grave.
Yeah, they're getting him to dig his own grave.
Yeah,
but then he's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
"You're fucking shit at this. Let me take over." And he's like, "You like loosen the earth and then dig." You
Exactly. But the thing is, like, the other detective from Seoul, Seo, he's in the background, and he's quite clearly in the background.
He's like, "Look at these fucking."
He's almost
amateurs.
he's almost out of focus on the frame. And at one point, the way it's all sort of one take, and the way the actors move and the camera moves, as Park's methods start to come through, you'll notice the camera moves in such a way, and the actors move, that he's just like removed from the frame, and it moves closer on the two central characters who are in the shot, who have no procedure, no logic to what they're doing. You know, it's all done their way, so the focus is just on them, and it plays out with very, very few cuts. But going back then, when we actually meet Seo, you know, the city detective, he's often further from the camera. He's sort of out of focus, far from the center of the frame. He's an outsider. He only really comes into focus of the frame whenever logic comes to fruition or things like that. And the blocking and the staging between both these characters, Seo and Park, when they start working together, it really reflects that emotional and professional distance they have from each other. And you'll notice there's a lack of cuts in a lot of scenes. Like, scenes will just sort of play out with characters entering and exiting the frame, whether that be physically or through the camera movement. It creates a strong sense of realism, and it really immerses you into the scene. It makes you feel like you're just sitting there as like a part of it all, having the actual scene move around rather than the actual camera jumping about. Like, there's a wee scene where it's after they've sort of like, you know, Kwang Ho's no longer a suspect, and they're in his father's restaurant, and they're sort of just sitting at a table, like, eating, and the scene just unfolds within the frame, no cuts. And there's a part where Kwang, like, comically bursts in through, like, a cupboard in the wall. Like,
he, like, falls out of his cupboard.
He rolls out, and, like, they've bought him, like, shoes to make up for their torture, and they're not even real Nikes.
Yeah, they're nice. Not...
Yeah. And then following that scene, they end up in this bar, and they're doing karaoke.
Just one other thing. Whenever they introduce the local detectives, it's hilarious. Because whenever they're trying to write the report and he's stabbing away at his typewriter with his index fingers, and then he gets to the end and he can't figure it out, and one of the other guys has to come over and like slide it across for him.
Clearly not used to doing any reporting or paperwork or...
Yeah, and he's talking about, like, was it like you were like staying up too late watching Body Heat or something?
Yeah. A remake of Double Indemnity, apparently, with William Hurt, which we would definitely watch.
An erotic thriller, right?
Thriller, of course. Michael Douglas should be in it, definitely.
I know, I can't believe he's
They missed the trick there.
Wait, so who's in it again?
William Hurt, Mickey Rourke's in it.
Mickey Rourke, in that era, very underrated.
Oh, aye. Yeah. Angel Heart?
Angel Heart, holy fuck. Yeah, amazing.
But anyway, following that scene, they end up in this bar, and Park, he's doing karaoke, and there's this specific shot where it's just the shot at the table, and they're sitting eating fruit.
Yeah, eating fruit in the bar.
They love eating bananas in the bar.
Peeling fruit with knives, just sitting there.
You'll see in the shot, you've got Park and Seo at the forefront on the other side of the shot, and there's two women just behind them, and then you've got the chief at the back in the middle, and he looks like he's passed out or something. His head's down, he's just lying there.
This is so funny. The movie's way funnier than I expected. This scene really made me laugh.
And then behind him, you've got the other detective, Park's partner, who looks like Bruce Lee. He's definitely mauled after Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
He's canoodling with some lady in the background behind the table. So they're in the foreground, right? And the character position, it drives the attention of this scene. It's a really, really well directed scene. At one point, as what they're talking about intensifies, they'll lean forward, and them leaning forward removes the two women behind them, and it really heightens the focus of those two main characters. But you still have that juxtaposition with your man in the background with the trollop canoodling, you know. And then the chief, as it all heightens and they're getting quite aggressive, the chief, who seemingly has been passive the whole time, he sort of like comes to and just is like desperate like, for something to vomit, and
like grasping at this bowl or something. They're like literally about to get into a fist fight. I think the local detective, I think he's like criticizing his method. I can't remember.
Yeah, it is.
But he says something funny to him that I forget. But then he like grabs the guy from Seoul by the little pal, and then the chief interrupts them, like reaching across the table, like gets whatever it is. Like they pass him this bucket, and he's just like vomiting.
But it's all one take, and it's the character movement. It's really rich visual storytelling. You know, you've got little stories going on within this single shot that don't really apply to like the plot, but it's still...
It makes it such a rich experience.
It's phenomenal
like, you believe
directing.
that you're watching a couple of detectives getting shit-faced in a
Absolutely.
karaoke bar, and it starts
Mark.
off with him singing.
Yeah,
and
a
like
very funny song.
hilarious song.
They're always the same sort of lyrics. It's always about like the spring mountains
Yeah,
and the birds.
the rain.
But yeah, the use of camera in the film, it demands that we look characters in the eyes, particularly the suspects, and it makes us wonder, do our perceptions matter? Like, do we really believe it's them, or do we just want it to be them, you know, the suspects? But of course, the most important face in the film belongs to the great Song Kang-ho, who would become a frequent collaborator with Bong in The Host, Snowpiercer, and Parasite.
See the chubby-faced main guy?
Yes, correct.
I saw someone online saying that he's like the South Korean Gerard Depardieu, who's like in every single good film they've produced.
Oh, he's class. But yeah, Song Kang-ho, he basically started his career in theatre, and he was first noticed by Bong in this film called Green Fish in 97.
Oh my god, is that what I think it is?
No, you're thinking about Cold Fish.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
That's a fucking
That's
experience.
the film. No, I haven't seen this one, Green Fish, but in this one he played a supporting role as a gangster. And Bong, he would describe Song after seeing this film as being extremely talented, despite being such an unknown at the time, to the extent that viewers assumed that they cast an actual gangster, like what they did in Goodfellas and things like that, you know. So Bong
And Sopranos.
Yeah, so-
although they're all the same guys, basically.
Exactly, yeah. So Bong and Song, they met in 97 for a coffee and a chat, and in the following years, Song would achieve great fame, notably for his role in Joint Security Area in 2000. As for Bong, with his first film basically being a financial disaster, he feared for his career. He really wanted to work with Song, but he feared that star power would keep him away. However, Song would really fondly remember that meeting they had in 97. He described Bong as being exceedingly polite, courteous, which was a huge factor to him when they discussed working on Memories of Murder. So Bong, he would basically write that part of Park Do-man with Song in mind. He actually claimed that Song had a face like people from that era. And they may not have even made the film without him.
I was reading a thing the other day by a guy who does a really funny podcast, writing in GQ about Masters of the Air, you know, the new Band of Brothers
Yeah.
spin-off.
Do you watch
that I
any
have
of it?
Zero interest in whatsoever.
You watch any of it?
No interest
Spielberg?
whatsoever.
I watched 2 episodes and I tapped out. Marvelized.
But like one of the things he was saying is there's so many people in it with smartphone face. Like you can't imagine them being in that era.
Everyone's too good looking. You fucking Austin Butler and
They
all.
don't have
yeah.
they don't have like 40s face.
Yeah, like Band of Brothers, you looking Damian Lewis and all, and they
Yeah,
were
yeah, yeah, yeah.
great gritty actors. Whereas this is, let's get the glossiest, prettiest boys on screen as we can. I can't believe Tom Holland and Timothy Chalamet, you know. But
Well, they would
anyway,
have had to cut Timothy Chalamet's hair, so that's probably out of the picture.
But anyway, filming, it commenced in 2002, and Bong, he would address the difficulties of shooting a film based on such a sensitive subject matter. The killer's still walking free at this stage, and the families of the victims are still alive. So they chose to film outside of Hwaseong, you know, as a show of respect. Instead, they chose to shoot it in Jangseong County, Haenem County, and Jinju. Bong also talked about struggling to find the correct shooting locations because so little remained of that totalitarian aesthetic that he was trying to shoot from, you know. And when you watch the film, you'll notice the color scheme is seemingly devoid of primary colors. It's been washed out, but there's still a lot of color in there. You'll notice how the opening and closing sequences, they're visually different from the rest of the film. You know, it's very colorful, vibrant. It's almost surreal. You know, you've this ocean of gold with the crops. And this is essentially showing the location of the film in its natural state. It reflects the innocence of the inhabitants. In the first scene, you have these children playing in a crime scene. And when Park shows up, the detective, the kids stand there and like, he hides a jar filled with insects. Like that's the crime kind of thing, you know. But it reflects the ignorance of the detectives and even the rest of the locals, and it disturbs the viewer's world and acts like a signpost for this impending horror. And then after that, we enter this grim, grimy reality of a community under this reign of authoritarian control. This world is just drained of any real hope. It's a hopeless society, essentially.
Yeah, it goes from this vibrant color to this washed out
industrial.
Like, I thought there was something wrong with my TV.
Yeah.
And I was like, hold on a minute, what is going on
just
with
so
this?
dark.
Like, is there some error happen?
Yeah, but despite the saturation, there is still a significant use of color in the film. Like, it's right in front of you, but you have to pay close attention, you know?
You have the use of red, which of course represents danger and violence.
Yeah.
You see this massively in the red of the victim's clothing, but also in the red of the detective's clothing.
Yes.
And there's a patch on the inside of
Bruce
Lee's jacket. That's the one.
Yeah. And even Park, like, he's wearing like checkered shirts with lots of red
Yeah,
on them.
very
And things
right.
like that. And
Did you notice their clothes were all very Americanized?
Yeah, I suppose,
Because they are basically like an American colony at this point. You know, they're constantly referring back to America. Like later on with the DNA results, like, oh, we don't have the technology, we have to send it back to America.
I'll send it back to Daddy.
Yeah. Daddy has the technology. But like, it looks like the government employees are more westernized than everyone else.
Yeah.
So like, everyone else was kind of, you know, like they might be wearing like a polo shirt or something that could be quite American, or might look like a cast off or something. But the guys who were the detectives were all kitted out in American clothes from that era. Like, as you were saying, Bruce Lee has the bomber jacket with the red interior.
Checkered shirts.
Yeah,
and
and the main detective has the lumberjack shirt at one point, I noticed. And those kind of like tan slacks.
Yes.
That you're wearing at the moment. But like really 80s, 90s kind of vibe.
Absolutely. And what about white?
Yeah, I see loads of white throughout the film, obviously symbolising innocence and purity.
The victims as well.
Yeah, victims, you see it in the school kids, big mass of school kids, all wearing sort of whitish uniforms.
Also, the woman who was raped by the killer but not killed.
Yeah.
That he like tracks from the
school.
From the school outhouse. And he's like talking to her on her porch. And then he sees the washing line and looks
you see
back
the white
and
clothes. You see the white clothes
just
then,
out of
pans,
view.
and
There's
then
a
you get the
red top. Yeah.
Very good. The first two major suspects, you know, Kwang Ho and the other man, they're being interrogated in like their underwear.
Yeah,
and it's all white. You know, Kwang Ho's got the white vest, the
exactly.
white fucking white front
giving you a
on.
bit of a subconscious sense that it's not them.
Exactly.
Yeah, they look helpless in their tidy whities.
Going on then, we also notice that all the crimes are committed in a rural setting. A lot of green about you. You see that in the very first scene. There's green fields everywhere. It revisits this later on when we see the suspect that we sort of get the sense that it was in the film.
Suspect.
The third
doe-eyed
suspect.
fucker.
The doe-eyed guy, exactly. The sort of clean, innocent guy. And when we're first introduced to him, he's in a room with green walls, everything around him.
Everything's
surrounded
green.
by
The first shot of him,
it's like the camera has like a green tint to it.
It was like literally, apart from him, the entire background is green. There's not a single other colour behind him. It reflects that rural setting where the killings have been taking place.
Absolutely.
You know, it's where the killer lurks, basically in the green. You know,
yeah,
but the green,
and you do see him lurking in that scene where you see him raising up.
Oh,
so when you see him in the background first, and he's just
shit! I missed him. I didn't see him in the background.
He pokes up.
I didn't realise it until like my fifth viewing of the film because we'll get into it.
See, this is why I wish I would have seen it in the cinema. Because I would see it in the cinema, but I didn't see it at home because of the glare and shit.
But yeah, also the police station as well. It's all primarily sort of greens and reds. And you find the detectives and the cops, they very much blend in with their environment. It represents them being a part of the problem because their clothes are literally the same colour as the police station, the walls, down that basement and all kind of stuff. And it represents them very much being, part of the problem.
Yeah, they're like a hindrance to solving the crime.
Yeah, exactly.
They keep fucking up.
Muddled up in it, in policing.
But yeah, these visual techniques, they're incredibly discreet, but they add so many layers to the storytelling, and it really enhances that cinematic experience. This is what cinematic storytelling is all about. So yeah, Bong Joon Ho and cinematographer Kim Hyung-koo, they decided to print the film using this process known as bleach bypass, in which a regular bleaching process that you would do in film editing is basically skipped, which creates a more desaturated image. The only scenes that don't use this process were, as we mentioned, like the opening and the closing scenes and the gold and rice fields. Now, while they were filming, Bong, he would basically be waiting around for cloudy days in order to film exterior scenes. And like, if the sun would come out at any point, they couldn't film. So if the sun came out, they had to stop and they'd just play football while they waited on more cloud.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, but
that would be great to work on.
Oh, aye. So Bong, he was known for like his really meticulous attention to detail, and he ensured that the film featured props, outfits, and sets that were accurate to that very period. One big challenge, it's a very discreet one, it was the use of newspapers in the film, which would convey some key information to the viewer. So basically, the font type and the paper used at that time were no longer in use or like available. So the art department had to source the correct paper and design all this font by hand, every single character, to ensure accuracy to that period. Like, I absolutely love that. That's pristine attention to detail. That's Lord of the Rings level attention. That's Kubrick.
That's how someone who's serious about making a film makes a film.
A notable piece of influence from the set design actually came from Taxi Driver. You know the set for the interrogation room down in the basement? It was built to appear like really, like it's really deep underground. This really massive staircase. It was down a well or something with this unnaturally long staircase leading down to it. Like, it feels so empty and cold. It reflects that climatic action scene in Taxi Driver when De Niro's trying to like rescue Jodie Foster. You know, you have that huge staircase that just seems to lead up into like absolutely nowhere. I thought that was interesting.
Was it the guy who shot John Lennon said he was doing it for Jodie Foster? Or am I thinking of someone else?
No, it wasn't him. Who shot Reagan? The guy who shot Reagan?
Said he was doing it for Jodie Foster.
Yeah, I think it was Reagan.
That sounds
No, John Lennon was Catcher in the Rye. Catcher in the Rye told him to do it, apparently.
Fucking hell.
Mark Chapman.
Yeah, it is Reagan.
Reagan? Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Makes sense.
why not? Why not shoot a person? We'll call back.
He was reportedly seeking fame to impress the actress with whom he had a fixation. He was reportedly seeking fame to impress the actress with whom he had.
Jodie Foster's like, "Whoa, shit, Reagan,
not guilty by reason of insanity." No.
But yeah, Bong Joon Ho. Sorry, you.
In my mind, I'm trying to think of like. Did you say his name was Mark Chapman?
No, that was the John Lennon killer.
What was his name?
John Warnock Hinckley Jr.
Oh, wow.
Jesus Christ. John Hinckley.
John
Hinckley. Oh, yeah, John Hinckley. I know that name.
John Hinckley Jr.
I'm just imagining Silence of the Lambs era. Jodie Foster. Mr. Hinckley.
Mr. Hinckley. Shoot that bastard right. Dr. Hinckley. But Bong Joon Ho, he was adored by the cast and crew. They would describe him as articulate, smart, detailed, meticulous. Song would basically describe him as being a greater genius than Mozart for his skill and his emotional capacity. He had this ability to give this really personalized direction to every actor because he made it his business to understand them as people, so he could really give them that personal direction. Bong,
all of your myriad beer cans are frightening the dog.
Anyway. Bong he opted for basically like no rehearsals between the actors, and that was to enhance that sense of awkwardness among the characters, notably the two leads. And their first encounter in the film was the first time they actually worked together on set. And in that scene, Song improvises with a drop kick straight out of WWE on Kim Sang-kyung, which sends him flying down the hill. Like, this was not planned at all. And it wasn't planned at all. It was the first time they worked together on set, and it was an improvised drop kick. In the moment, he was just like, I'm going to drop kick this fucker. So funny. And he fully nails him.
So what we should explain for context, he's arriving from Seoul.
Yes.
And there's like a woman who's obviously been reading the news about this like
she's clutching
serial
her
killer
handbag really close.
So he's trying to get her attention to ask for directions, and she's running away, and then she like falls down the hill a bit.
Hilariously stumbles down the hill. Yeah.
And then he's like trying to help her, and he's like grabbing her arm. She's like, "Get off!" And then the detective is driving past, sees this, jumps out of his car, runs down the hill, and drop kicks him.
Yeah, fully nails him.
this is also another funny point about his shaman's eyes, because then after that happens, the new detective's like, you got a shitty eye for identifying criminals, you idiot.
Yeah. But as the film progresses, obviously, like, you'll notice how Kim's character, the cop from Seoul, becomes increasingly gaunt and disheveled, which was a result of the actor Kim drastically lowering his food intake as well as the amount of sleep he was getting. So he was really getting into character.
He gets more and more aggressive as the film goes on and as the frustration builds, because he starts off as this factual, evidence-based guy. Like he's going to do it right and he's going to use his mind and think it through and like reach the correct conclusion. But when he's constantly frustrated and blocked from getting there, and when he's so sure that this has got to be the guy, all pretense and all like rationality goes out the window and he starts to become more and more violent, building up towards the end of the film.
And then your main guy does the opposite. He seems more rational towards the end, and he's not.
It's almost like their rules are reversing.
Yeah. Originally, the script, it had basically suggested that Kim's character had been involved in a serial killer case in his past, and because of a blunder, something went wrong, and he carried this guilt because of it. But they couldn't work out the backstory for the film, but it's an interesting character dynamic. I feel like he kind of plays it with that. You feel the actor is very much bearing the idea in mind in his portrayal with his real, like, I have to stick with the procedure here. And
I can't fuck this up.
Yeah, no, it explains his meticulous attention to the evidence and the documentation. It's like he's determined to not fail again, even though it's not mentioned in the film. You still see that in the performance. So with the real life killers still obviously being unidentified in 2003, Bong would use different actors with similar physiques to portray the killer throughout the film. Granted, you never get a good look at him. It's mainly sort of silhouettes, hands, and like a blurry sort of shot. But it meant that there wasn't any clear and consistent characteristic. You know, it brings a real disturbing balance of ambiguity to the film. So my attention was first drawn to this film when I noticed it. I think it was on the IMDb top 250. I'd never before, nor had I seen any of Bong Joon Ho's films. I think what drew me to it would have been probably watching Oldboy. It was a film that really opened up the floodgates for me in terms of foreign cinema. Like, I would have probably been 16, 17 when I watched Oldboy, and prior to that, I hadn't been very adventurous with sort of watching film, like foreign cinema.
Oldboy's incredible. It's some of the best fight scenes in cinema ever.
It's just one of the most gripping and shocking films you ever see in your life. It's unbelievable. And I mean the original Korean version, not the Spike Lee remake with Josh Brolin. It's fucking shite. It's one of those films, when I first watched it, I wasn't really ready for it, nor did I fully appreciate the emotional impact. To be honest, I'm not even sure if I was aware that it was based on actual events. And when you explore that real life situation and the unresolved case, it brings a whole new meaning and nuance to what Bong has actually done here. Like, I thought it was very good, but I had nowhere near the adoration I have for it now.
That's in massive contrast to your opinion on true stories making a film better.
Well, that wasn't the factor that brought it in for me. Like, Memories of Murder, for me, it's nothing short of a masterpiece. Not only is it a gripping crime drama, but it's a deep dive into that psychological damage suffered by these detectives involved in the investigation, who become completely consumed by these crimes. Like, the film asks us, how would characters without procedure behave in a police procedural film? And this is only Bong Joon Ho's second film, and he displays this level of control that could rival Akira Kurosawa, you know, whether it be this beautiful framing and compositions that you could hang in the Louvre, you know, that cinematic rhythm, or the care and attention to emotion and theme. This film establishes him as a major player in modern cinema. Think about it, it's a very discreet scene. We were sort of mentioning it earlier. The early scene where Park goes to that first crime scene, they go back to it, and he arrives there and he finds a footprint on the dirt road that could have been evidence. They find it, they just sort of like finds a stick, draws a circle around it, and then fucks off. Just like, I remember that later, we'll look at that later, you know, which it's abandoned and then only to be ran over by a fucking tractor about 5 minutes later. And you've got the body in the field, the journalists, locals everywhere, police. You see two of them falling down the hill as they're trying to enter the crime scene. You know, I think one of them was like the chief inspector or something like that. He like tumbles down the hill hill. Like nobody has a clue what they're doing in this
Yeah.
scene. It's that sense of indifference and ineptitude. They don't know how to react because there is no procedure.
Yeah. There's no precedent for this ever happening before.
Yeah, but the whole scene, it feels so improvised and real. You know, it disarms convention. It's real filmmaking prowess to command.
Yeah, because the detective is sort of storming about, screaming at everyone.
Yeah.
You're like, get these kids out of here, like, get
Yeah.
the journalists away, like, stop that. And he's like screaming at the tractor driver, like, stop it. And
Tractor!
And then he just like drives straight through the crime
He's just
scene.
shouting
And he's
tractor.
like, is he deaf or what?
It's such directorial skill to command such a large open area to that degree. And then you've got that clash of personalities and morals. We'll go back, between the two leading detectives. It's one of the most effective character conflicts I've seen on film. Park, he starts off as this rural, lazy cop. He's conditioned to find shortcuts and do basically whatever it takes to point the finger at the easiest target. In the first act,
get a quick conviction, wash your hands with the case.
in the first act, he's basically a child. He's a klutz. He's inexperienced. He believes a local disabled boy to be the killer and abuses him into false confessions. He fails to prevent crime scenes being tampered with or destroyed. He plants false evidence.
So later on, whenever because he's lost that footprint, he then I think he takes a shoe.
He takes one of Kwang Ho's trainers
from his house.
No, it's one of Kwang Ho's trainers.
Yes,
He
that's
takes
what I'm
his
saying.
shoes. Yeah.
From Kwang Ho's house. And prints it in the ground and then takes a picture of it and is like, this matches your shoe.
But he does it in front of the other cop.
Yeah,
like it's
yeah,
regular
yeah.
procedure.
Yeah.
And then he ends up even he ends up going to bathhouses to look for pubeless
Oh
men.
my God,
Because they
that's
haven't
so
found
funny.
any hairs at the
That's
crime
so
scene.
funny. Yeah, it's like the takeaway from the cop from Seoul is like, this guy's a professional. He knows what he's doing. The takeaway from Park, the local detective, is, well, we must be looking for a hairless man. We need to find a man who's got no pubic hair. So then
There's that shopper just sitting in the bathhouse,
and he's
staring at everyone.
he's like checking out like kids as they're walking past and shit. And then
He's that old guy in the gym who stares at everybody's cock, basically.
But like prior to that, whenever he's trying to okay this policy with the chief's like, what are you gonna do? Pull down the pants of passing men?
So there's even a scene where he's presenting information to the chief on like a big board. He's got the pages with all the information on it, and it's like watching a child doing a school presentation they haven't prepared for.
Yes, it's like the least engaging presentation I've ever
your man's
seen.
just sitting there. Like,
Everyone's falling asleep.
Yeah. He's just like sort of making shit up.
Yeah, he's like, and then on the 26th.
But then obviously as the film progresses, his character, he starts to pick up traits from his counterpart Seo about the importance of following evidence and procedure. And Seo, he operates by the book. He gradually starts to lose hope in his own methods, and the poles between these characters, they gradually shift as the film progresses. Each of the killings, it brings the two characters closer together, but only in their collective madness at the killer's sadistic opportunism, if you know what I mean. Like, they're exploiting this national disarray across the country, which has allowed evil to flourish.
Yeah, exactly. At one point early on, you first become aware of this. Like, obviously everything looks like shit and like all the houses and everything are very poor. But you're first aware that shit is going down, like the country's not right, whenever his partner, let's call him Bruce Lee, is dragging someone through this protest that's going on. And there's a bunch of students throwing Molotov cocktails at the police, and he's just dragging someone through this crowd. Yeah. So like that's the first time you become aware that there's something going on here that's in the background.
Well.
And there's constant drills because it's like
the school kids,
in case the war kicks off again. The war still to this day isn't over. It's just paused.
Yeah.
It officially hasn't ended.
And there were big student riots in the same year, in 86 or whatever.
Was that just surrounding like rights or
It was tensions over the new Korean Democratic Party's stance of compromise towards the government, including the denunciation of the student movement.
Right.
So the new Korean government was coming down hard on the student movement.
basically
and
fuck
there was a
student.
lot.
They're
No,
the opposition?
Yeah.
But no, like, as Park develops as a detective, Seo, he treads closer to a darker tunnel, literally and metaphorically. And both the character arcs pretty much meet in the middle at this disillusionment. Another concept you could pick up on is basically the consequences of actions. The detectives, they pay for their methods in the long term. There's one scene in particular where Park and Seo, they're quarreling in the station and they end up fighting. Basically, their ineptitude is distracting them. And then the chief, he bursts in, breaks up the fight. And then the female detective, she comes in, tells him the song's playing on the radio.
Yeah.
You know, and then he sticks his hand out the window and it's raining.
Yeah.
You know, they're not prepared at all. And then the chief tries ringing the garrison, trying to come and help cover the area. But apparently they're off busy suppressing demonstrations and so on. Student demonstrations.
They're putting down student demonstrations in another city.
Yes, and then that obviously leads to another murder, and it's incredibly tragic because they were murdered while the detectives were fighting in the station
At the exact same time.
Yeah, and like this is a real turning point for Park's character. This is the one where they have the body, it's on the slab, and they're going through the autopsy, and the guy who's doing it, he ends up removing pieces of peaches from the vagina.
9 peaches.
Nine
like diced
crafted
peach.
pieces
Yeah.
of peaches from the victim's vagina, which
Peach?
is like
We should also touch on the song. So they realize that every time there's a murder,
It's the female detective.
They know already that it happens when it rains. But then this female detective comes in with the information that every time there's a murder and it's raining, this song called "Sad Letter" gets played
and
on
Park
the
sort of
radio.
poo-poos her when
he's like, what is she
"Very good,
bringing us?
nice
now?"
idea. He says,
Yeah. But like initially when she comes over, he's like, what's she bringing us now? Like, and then afterwards, he's so dismissive.
Yeah.
That is an impression.
That turns out to be
no good.
No, I was impersonating the character, or it's allowed.
You can totally do an impression, but it's as long as if your impression is good, like if you're doing an impression of Samuel L. Jackson, you can do a good impression of Samuel L. Jackson, fine. But if you're like, I do love watermelon and fried chicken,
But that's his character.
and that's what you're going to say.
When
That's
he's
your
playing the
release.
Uncle Tom and Django Unchained.
Oh.
You know, hell no, I ain't got no problem with it. I was going to pop burn the bed, shoot
Forget
everything else.
it.
It's like
Forget
the
about
motherfucker's gone.
Forget
yeah,
about
but
Django
that's fine.
Forget about
That's
Django.
my point.
If you were to do an impression of him doing the
we should come
cheeseburger scene, the Hawaiian cheeseburger scene, and you did that voice,
Hamburgers.
yeah, I'd racist.
Really?
Yeah.
No, I'm not.
I think it's because it wouldn't be accepted today. I mean,
Yeah,
it's-
by
it's-
mad people.
If it comes across like you're trying to mock their voice or something,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
where the problem comes
But
in.
if you're doing a film podcast, you have to be able to do impressions.
When you
of
did that
characters
voice,
from
I
films.
pictured you with chopsticks in your
Yeah,
mouth.
no, that was not a good example. That was not a good example. He literally says it like that. But
he does.
anyway, we must move on.
Yes.
Where was I?
In the middle of your ping impression.
Ming the Merciless.
And then think about the scene where Kwang Ho, who was once the prime suspect, they realize that he turns out to be the prime witness in the case.
This is the special needs kid.
Yeah, and like they abused the kid, they tortured him, they tried to beat confessions out of him. And then when it dawns,
And they were rehearsing lines, rehearsing the
I
confession. with-
feeding him it.
they were coercing him.
Throughout the film,
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
coercing and they're like trying to get people to confess the way that it
Yeah,
happened.
like, think about that second. We're
Yes.
going off the side talk. The second suspect, he's clearly this like sick, deranged sex guy.
see, that's what I was. That's what I was
he's like
gonna
acting
say.
out his fantasy in the confession.
They're back at the scene because they're completely stumped. They have no ideas, but they're like, well, criminals sometimes return to the scene of the crime, so
Yeah.
let's stake out the crime scene. So they're waiting, the two local detectives are waiting at the crime scene, and they see a guy walk along, and they're like, oh shit, is this the killer? Is this the guy? And it turns out to be the other detective
Yeah,
who's had the
yeah,
same idea because they're all out of ideas, and he's there listening to a recording of the song that who they think is the killer requests on the radio every time, and the two local guys are like, that's weird, what's he doing?
Yeah.
You know? Like they're like, what the fuck? And then another guy
dude.
comes along, and the other detective from Seoul hides, and this other guy starts pulling something out of his trousers, and it turns out to be like a bra, and all the cops are like, oh shit, we got him.
I'm masturbating in force.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so he takes this shit out of his trousers, and then you see him taking his trousers down a bit, and he's wearing these
Wee Pink Panthers.
ridiculous, like the frilliest women's knickers you've ever seen. And then the next shot is him jerking off with the... Does he have the flashlight in his mouth?
Yes, yeah.
And he's got
it's shaking as he's doing it.
He's got the bra and pants laid out on the ground as if they were on a person with the torch in his mouth with the women's knickers on,
It's
jacking
the way the torch
off.
shakes,
and
isn't
the
it?
torch is shaking. The light from the torch is shaking. And then the cops are like, right, we fucking got him. And they start to advance. But of course, being the klutzes they are, one of them steps on a twig and the killer, or who they think is the killer, is alerted, freaks out and runs away.
It's great chasing.
So then they're chasing him and they start like, they chase him down the road and they chase him into this town.
They lose him in the alley.
Yeah. And they're like, damn, he's a fast little
Great
bastard.
scene. Yeah. And then they see him again, they track him into the quarry.
Yeah.
That's actually interesting.
And they see that he's like blended in with the other workers in the quarry, but they find him because he bends down and they see the women's knickers at the
Park, he sees the knickers, but he doesn't really alert the other detectives to that. He lets on it's his shaman eyes. It's like part of his trick, because like this is still when he's trying to go by his method, and he lines them all up, pretending he doesn't know who it is, and he's like, I'm gonna look at you all in the eye, like, oh, I know it's you, but it's because he's seen. But he doesn't let on. Obviously, But then obviously at this point, we've got past that, and he's got to that point where he realizes he's been wasting time, and this is where the character arc really starts to switch.
Yeah, he's been being a fucking narcissist, being like, oh, I got this. Like, I can see whenever you get the moment where he meets the woman who's got her washing on the line by like near the school, and she says that she deliberately didn't look at the killer, but she said the only identifying thing was that he had soft hands. That was symbolic of the upper classes, or like the more comfortable classes, not having to do manual labor. And that's why immediately at that point, it's not the second suspect, because he works in the quarry. And he's blended back into work, because you realize he's wearing the same uniform as everyone else. So in that moment that it's impossible for it to be him. And also, it made me think of Cambodia. In the killing fields in Cambodia, Pol Pot murders loads of people with soft hands, and and also like people with glasses, because that's seen as the intelligentsia. It's like a horrible perversion of socialism, basically. Anyway,
but again, back to that scene or what I was talking about with Kwang Ho. Obviously, they've tortured him, beat confessions out of him, but then it dawns on them that he is actually a key witness in the case.
Yeah, they're like, how did he know all the details so specifically if he wasn't there?
Yeah,
and then they're like, fuck. He watched it happen because he loved following this girl home that he fancied.
Exactly.
He was following her when the killer abducted her and killed her.
Hay bales, yeah. So they desperately they chase him down, but he's terrified of them. He doesn't trust them, and the reckless actions of those detectives, it leads to him being killed by the train. So, it's a major setback in the investigation.
That whole scene is crazy. Bruce Lee is like, I think the police chief has thrown him off the case, or like thrown him out of the interrogation room and told him not to.
in the restaurant.
He's shit-faced, and he starts this brawl in the restaurant. And the kid Kwang Ho,
he hits him with
he runs in seeing this and hits him with a board with a nail in it.
Rusty nail,
and the nail goes into his leg. And later on in the film, being an idiot, he refuses to get it treated.
What do you call that?
It's tetanus.
Tetanus.
So like later on, a doctor is like, tetanus is no joke. Like if you get a rusty nail and you go to the doctor immediately, you fucking morons. Whereas he's trying to be all hard and be like, oh, it's nothing, it's just a scratch. And then he has his lower leg amputated.
Yeah, he ends up losing his leg. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, it sort of highlights the consequences of their hasty and impulsive decisions, how their mistakes and their ineptitude will impede them for the rest of this investigation. We're just going to call him Bruce Lee. He's lost his leg, but Park has tried to change his methods. His old partner hasn't, and he suffers as a result of this.
Yeah. Also, going back to that scene when they're having the brawl, he gets the nail in his leg, and then the kid runs away from them, and they chase after him, and he climbs up a telephone pole to get away from them, and they're trying to like coax him down, and he's like, no, you're going to kill me if I come down. And then they're like, right, okay, fuck it. stay up there, and they have a conversation with him while he's up the pole.
That's it. While the film, it's always emphasizing the cost of their mistakes and their poor judgment. It does also reflect how the film critiques those institutions that push the authoritative figures to taking drastic measures. You know, the film's constantly challenging our perceptions, even like the reliability of memory and evidence at the same time. There's no conclusive proof or evidence in the film. There's various leads and suspects which will all have some sort of circumstantial evidence that could point toward their guilt, but nothing is conclusive. We as a viewer, like the detectives, are constantly grappling with uncertainty. And the detectives, they're relying on people's memories, which also prove to be unreliable. Their memories are influenced by various factors like bias and fear, you know, and even we sort of touched on it earlier, even the cinematography is uncertain. Scenes are shot to obscure the full picture, like the scene where the woman's in the house and she's going to the factory and meet presumably her husband. She comes with the umbrella and she's walking along the fields and she's sort of like singing a song in the rain.
I think she was drunk.
No, I don't think she's drunk. No, I think she's just like, pick up her husband or something, like bring him an umbrella. She's singing and then you hear this whistling in the background along with her singing. She stops.
Asking to be abducted though. She's like walking about singing that I'm walking all alone.
I walk alone looking to be kidnapped and killed. But yeah, you hear this whistling in the distance and she stops, and whenever she turns, it's amazing. She turns with the torch, does a full 180, and you see it like the middle angle, you just see this little head pop up. It's so, you wouldn't spot it initially unless you were looking for it, but you see a little head pop out of the fields and it's so like,
just head and shoulders.
My God.
I think I've seen the film 3 times and I've missed that every single time.
But it's an amazing, that scene's incredible, that build of tension toward that, where like she sort of pauses and you can tell she realizes, oh my God, I'm gonna die.
Yeah.
And then she makes that desperate sprint toward the factory, and then that very distorted out of focus shot of just this guy running
up towards the camera.
It makes you jump. It's Jesus,
it's like the scariest bit in the film.
It is absolutely, it's terrifying. Yeah, it's amazing.
He's like scurrying almost on all fours towards her. It's terrifying.
Yeah. But like all this, it reflects how the truth in the film, it's so often out of reach. Like the truth itself, it's elusive, it's slippery. It questions the very understanding of what truth actually is, because the apparent truth is built on questionable memories, you know, altered perceptions, various perspectives.
And on assumptions as well.
Individual interpretations. Yeah.
Towards the end, the detective from Seoul is totally convinced that the third suspect is the guy because of this evidence that's presented with this song Sad Letter that gets played on the radio every time a murder is committed whenever it's raining. And it turns out this guy is the one...
Sending the postcards out.
Yeah, the radio station finds the return address from the letters requesting the song. And the detective from Seoul is like, well, this has to be the guy, because he's the one who's requesting this song that precedes every murder.
Yeah.
But it's not the guy, and he's...
Well, you don't know. That's the thing. It's so uncertain the whole time.
But that is the piece of evidence that he has decided means that this guy is guilty.
To it. Yeah.
But what if it's just a coincidence?
Yeah,
What if he has another reason for requesting this song whenever there's heavy rain like that?
That's it.
You know,
the whole
that's
film.
That's the question that's kind of left.
The whole film, it makes you ask, how can you find truth and certainty in an uncertain world? There's so many strong elements of tragedy in the film, underlined with that sheer helplessness of a nation under the regime that it's under. This incompetent national police, they're constantly preoccupied with the student protests and rebellion. And although the local police are incompetent and violent, it's more to do with them being impotent rather than evil. You know, they're not out to like do bad, like they're just limp. Like that impotence is actually referenced with Park's character with his girlfriend, where like he's having sex with her and his dick keeps slipping out and stuff. Like, he can't keep it up, you know, that kind of stuff. It's impotence, really.
That's hilarious. I did not even notice that. I must have been away from the TV at that point. I missed that bit.
One important element of the film, definitely worth discussing, is the sense of like masculine structure across all aspects of society in the film. It's something which Guillermo del Toro discussed in regard to Memories of Murder. He did a wee special on the Criterion release of the film. So you have the military oppression with the students' protests turning into violent clashes, you know, police beating their suspects. The local police in the film, they come across as aloof, basically, you know, very close to being on the wrong side of the law. The world itself is very masculine. You've factories, quarries, lots of digging, extracting. You know, even when we see Park at the end of the film, he's working as a salesman selling juice extractors.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like the female officer in the station, she seems to be the most intelligent of all of them.
She's the most competent, but she's treated like she's an idiot.
Yeah, it's her.
By these incompetent idiots.
It's her investigating that leads them closer to finding the killer, but she isn't taken seriously. Then when we meet the prime suspect, the third suspect, we can see that like they don't embody the masculinity of the detectives. You know, he's very delicate. He is quite feminine. You know, soft hands, fine features.
Yeah.
And when they find him, he's like in an office reading a book or something. You know. And then there's obviously that song that plays. You know.
Yeah, it's a very kind of soft, melodic song.
Yeah. It's requested by the suspect.
It reminds me of something that Patrick Bateman might like.
Yeah, like a sweet, soft ballad which contrasts that masculinity of the detectives world. And these elements, they further frustrate the masculine detectives. You know, they go about behaving like cops in classic TV shows, basically.
They're obsessed with a TV
see them
show
watching
about
it.
cops.
Yeah, like,
and they're like, oh, the theme tune is so good. They're hilarious.
You see them, like
they are caricatures almost.
Yeah, they're unable to comprehend how a man who isn't hyper masculine can get the better of them. And the film's quite clever in that it puts the viewer in this similar position. Everything about the suspect makes us want to really believe it's him. We find ourselves as frustrated as the detectives are. And then you have that whole like ending sequence with the final suspect, which is so powerful. And it's so effective in that it reminds you that justice, while it does not always prevail, you must continue to seek it out. So if we look at where Seo decides you had enough, you get that last victim, you got that last suspect, he's primed to be the guy, but they're unable to hold him under any evidence, so he has to be released. And then the suspect, Seo's still following him, like keeping an eye on him at night, and then he evades him on like a rainy night, and then you have another killing.
Yeah.
And once he evades him, it cuts to a scene where there's two girls walking down a lane in the woods, and they're both past each other, and you actually get the point of view of the killer, and you get him deciding between
two
victims, like which one am I going to go for? It's very disturbing.
And the one that he chooses
schoolgirl
and kills is the schoolgirl that Seo had
helped out, or
he put a plaster on her back.
Yeah.
And then at the crime scene afterwards, there's cops throwing up. Everyone is horrified by what is done to this young girl.
He almost disregards his own methods because he comes up and touches the body to like hold on her top. It's like he's disregarding his own methods because he wouldn't dare touch it.
Not just to violate his own methods. He's got so close to the case and he has a connection with the girl that the plaster that he put on that they're looking at is all gross and, you know, whatever. And he like takes the plaster off really gently and covers her up because they're like lifting her top up to see that, like, what's this? There's a plaster there. And he kind of like restores her dignity by covering her up again.
But it's an interesting contrast because earlier in the film he was like shouting at people, don't dare disturb the crime scene. So that just shows his character arc, how much he's shifted.
And as he's walking away, one of the cops who's there is like, why are you touching the corpse? Why are you touching the corpse?
But then once you get that point of view of the killer, like deciding between them, and he picks the one, you get this almost ritualistic, sacrificial few shots. You're forced to watch the killer lay out the body and the tools of death, basically. It's like a pig on a spit.
When he decides which one it is, they're both still relatively close to each other. Like they've passed, but they're maybe about 50 feet away or something. And you see him running out from like a hedgerow or something and just grabbing her and running away. And the other girl who's just down the path hears something and turns around, and the other girl is gone. And she's like, what the fuck?
You sort of like, you see like,
what was that?
Yeah, you see like all his instruments of torture. It's like, because it's being committed during a national defense drill blackout, the irony, he can like take his time, like he's gently laying out all these things and you get to see what he's going to use, and it's incredibly disturbing. And then obviously, as we said, when they discover the body, you can see how Park as well, he's resigned to the fact that he's out of his depth. You just see him walking away from the body like, I don't, you know. And Seo, then he moves into darker territory. In the darker territory, it's, he leaves the crime scene, heads straight for the third suspect, takes him and brings him to that tunnel, this seemingly endless tunnel on the train tracks.
Abyss.
It is. It's a literal and metaphorical abyss. Like Seo, he's basically decided, I'm going to kill this guy. I'm going to kill him. I'm going to just do away with him. Cover it up.
There's a point where he has him on his knees on the train tracks and he's pointing a gun at his head and he's like, nobody will care if I kill you.
Exactly. Yeah. But like before he can fall through with it, Park arrives with the results of the DNA sample that's been returned from America, and when Seo gets it,
Which they've been waiting for fucking ages.
you can tell he can't wait.
And another murder has been committed while they've been waiting, and they've been like stressing out about it not arriving.
Like he can't wait to get his hands on it. When Seo finally reads it, he finds that the DNA, it says it does not match the suspect, and it's just the most hard-hitting moment for him. He decides, I'm just going to disregard this evidence.
Yeah, he's like, fuck this document, I don't need it. And that's kind of like whenever his character is completely turned.
Yeah.
That's the moment where you see that he's almost become like the local detectives. They've traded places, if you will.
No, absolutely.
And he's like, nah, fuck this, I'm still going to kill him. But then he gets away.
Well, the emotional impact of the scene is amazing. It's all these close-up point of view shots, eye to eye. Park steps in while Seo gets the gun. Park grabs him by the neck to look one last time in his eyes, the suspect.
Yeah.
And you get that contrast of the light and the dark of the tunnel. And even the shot whenever Park is looking into the eyes of the suspect, Bong, he's visually painted the division between the characters. Park, he's just outside the tunnel and he's wet, he's being rained on, and the suspect, he's out of the rain, he's dry. Park's face is dark and shadowy against the tunnel, whereas the suspect's face is light. It's like painting that real division. It's an incredibly powerful scene. It would be so easy for Park and Seo to just kill this guy and cover it up. But again, Park has realised his rash decisions and lack of judgment have allowed these killings to flourish, and he's determined to not let it happen again.
Yeah. And so a train comes and the suspect is on the other side of the tracks. The train goes past between them and then he's gone. And they're like, where the fuck? And it's obvious that he's run down the tunnel.
They see him down the tunnel. He tries to shoot on him, but he stops him.
Park knocks his hand, and you see it's a really good practical effect. You see the bullets ricochet on either side. Of the tunnel.
It's great the way it leaves that whole case there. It stops there and then it leads us on to the fucking incredible epilogue of the film, where you've got Song at the end of the film. We see such a different character. He's even wearing glasses, which is like he's accepted.
I didn't recognize him for a second.
He's wearing glasses like he's accepted that his shaman eyes were a falsehood. They don't work.
But also at the end, what I took away from it anyway is that he's fully bought into the Washington consensus. Like, he's become fully Americanized because he's working as a salesman for a juicer company.
Yeah, big time.
And the conversation he's having on the phone, he's speaking to the director or the chairman of the company, and he's laughing about how his manager keeps telling him off. Like, you can't treat people like
the
this.
Most regular
and he's like,
white people bullshit.
No, but not even that. What's he doing? Is he like hard selling people, cheating them, lying, fucking them over just to get a sale? He's become this American archetype.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's become this unscrupulous salesman who's just going to make a buck and fuck everyone else. Yeah. And it was like the cementing of the Americanization of South Korea.
Yeah, fair enough. That's actually a good point, yeah. But it's obviously it's present day, and he finds himself back at that first crime scene that you get at the start of the film, and he decides to stop the car when we take a wee look, and he goes down. You see him, he looks into the tunnel where he first found the body. And then this young girl appears and she tells him that another man had done the same recently, and he told her he had done something there in the past. And then Park, he obviously realizes it was the killer.
Yeah.
And the memories of murder flood back to him. It's incredibly nuanced acting from your man. Like, it's amazing. He seems to be contemplating whether, just in his face, it's like he's contemplating whether he will allow himself to relive all that pain and suffering. Like, the wound is reopening.
He's so interested, and he still can't let it go, and that's why he's looking in the storm drain or whatever it is. And then he's like, "Did you remember what he looked like?"
Yeah, exactly.
And she was like, "Oh, he just looked plain."
I know. Yeah,
and and he's frustrated again.
But that final shot where he turns and stares down the camera to the viewer, and you can really see the grief in his features, like the regret and the fear. He's basically looking out into the audience at the killer. That's the whole point, because at this point, obviously, the killer hasn't been caught. This is the whole point of the final shot of this film, where he looks into the camera. He's looking at the killer because Bong knows the killer is out there, more than likely watching this film, and the killer's looking back, watching their own work.
In a worse Hollywood version, you would have that piece of classical music that's like da 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 da. You know what I mean?
I know you're going from. You could say that, or maybe he's imploring the viewer to like understand, how helpless and hopeless we were in this investigation. But it's interesting how like when the girl starts telling him about the other man that was there, that's when he takes off his glasses.
Yeah.
He brings back the shaman in preparation for that final shot, looking at the killer. Like, one of these viewers knows they're guilty. It's like his shaman vision does prevail in the end to a certain degree. And you can compare it with like the very, very first shot of the film, where it's like an innocent child staring toward the camera, like looking at a little bug. Park was innocent at the start of the film, but not anymore. It's a spine-tingling final frame. The film basically ends on a memory of an imperfect recollection. It's fucking stunning.
Yeah.
Absolutely stunning. It's an incredibly sophisticated thriller. It's one that puts most Hollywood crime dramas to shame. Like, Quentin Tarantino is a huge fan of the film. The most obvious counterpart to Memories of Murder would undoubtedly be David Fincher's Zodiac from 2007, which was made like a few years after. It's another fantastic film that has this really haunting ambiguity, using the unsolved case of the Zodiac killer. It's two films based on true events with no closure. It's also similar in that it's not as much focus on plot as it is an examination of how these characters will behave and react in the face of this elusive evil, an evil that serves to highlight their own inadequacies. Like, there's even some direct references in Zodiac. There's a scene where one of the detectives is talking to a little girl and he says, "Did you see his face? What did he look like?" And she says, "Normal." It's definitely a direct reference to that. Fincher, I assume, would have great respect for that film as well. There's others you could think of in comparison, like Seven, Prisoners, Mystic River, even Cure, as we sort of mentioned earlier. Films that make you question the pursuit of truth, and like the consequences of obsession. But I think that will do us for one day. I think we've gone on long enough today. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again, guys. Until next time, ta-da.
See you soon.
Catch you later.
그럼 아무 말도 필요 없이 서로를 믿어요. 어리숙하다 해도 나약하다 해도